everybody just another minute to fill their glass, grab a bite, and find their seat.
Yes, he is
Well,
alive.
welcome to another William Stafford birthday celebration.
No.
This year marks the 100th centenary of Bill Stafford's birth. And there are events happening all through the year, all over the state, all over the country. So we want to kick it off in Eugene here in fine style. A couple of thank yous, and then we'll move into the program. A thank you, as always, to the Friends of William Stafford, who organize the distribution of all these events and contribute information and information covers it, doesn't it? And there'll be more about the Friends of William Stafford after we've had the first segment of this afternoon's program. And we'll start here in a minute with some comments by Mike McGriff about the publication of the new Stafford volume called Winterward. Thanks, as always, to Tsunami and Scott. The best place in the world for reading. And there's a bucket over there to put your contributions in to help Scott keep going. Also, thanks to Quentin Hallett for her organizing efforts, to Ingrid Wendt, who, even though she's in Mexico, did her share via the internet. And for those of you who haven't heard, Ralph Salisbury Fallon broke his hip.
Oh.
He's doing pretty well, according to what I've heard, but it kind of spoiled their Mexican writing retreat. Also thanks to Sam Roxachua for the wonderful poster, and to Randy Bjornstad, who did a fine write-up in the Register Guard last weekend. And that covers it pretty much. I suppose I ought to also thank my wife for all the food. So now, if Scott has the chairs set up, he almost has the chairs set up, Scott's going to come up and say a word or two about Mike McGriff, and then Mike will come up and talk about the publication of this book. After that, I think we'll take a break and eat some more, have some more wine, juice, tea, whatever, and then we'll get into the audience participation. And the way we've always done that, and it's always worked very well, is it's just as the mood strikes you, come around right around this way is the best, and read a Stafford poem that you particularly like, and or a poem of yours that is somehow related to Stafford. And so now, without further ado, here's Scott.
I'm just going to show you a couple. You can always just move this a little bit. I have a little microphone problems, but it sounds good at the moment. So feel free to, you can move it like this or up and down when you come up. It's just kind of a little lesson here. Yes. Wait a second here. Let's make it official here because I've got to take a picture to put on Facebook with this funky old camera here for Ralph and Ingrid. Yes, all right, everybody say cheese. Okay, good. Oops. Say cheese. Well, I have a very poor man's camera now. I'm gonna get it there. There we go. Simple. Nice. Yes, that worked. No, that looked great. Packed house. Sam really did a great job. If you see any of these little pieces of paper, just a little, grab one. And at first he's Scott, look at this, I've got it done. And he was very honored. It was almost, golly, poets are humble people. It's a wonderful thing. Scott edited, I don't have time to edit it. I was too busy right then. I don't have 5 minutes, so read it. Read it just one more time and then put it out there. So he read it one more time and put it out there. And on the initial one, it says 2585 Willamette Strat. So, I happened to see that and I wrote back to her, oh, there's the word strat. He immediately came back, slang. So these are the valuable ones. Grab those, and then he corrected the book. Mercy, Tear It Down. This was one of Mike McGriff's first great poems, and Lone Goose Press did a very nice. It's a wonderful broadside. Feeling the type. But Mike's an Oregon poet from Tavern Books up north. He used to work here, but interesting too. We're going to find out about the different covers. Michael was instrumental in getting a grant from, he'll just tell us, I don't know what it is. I'll let him do the talking on that. I know that this is 250, this is a lot more, 250 copies, and a lot more. Feel free. This right here, Colophone, this book was designed and typeset by Michael McGriff, etc. So if you wanted to get somebody to sign one of these today, to have him sign it right there would be kind of a mixed honor for everybody. And it would be good. You know what I'm saying. And Michael and I have been friends for many years. Yes, indeed. Sweet. We put it when he first came in, Dave and I were just like, oh no, it's Christmas. We don't want to train some big guy. So we put Jackie in charge. And that was a wonderful thing. She took him around. And endless stories, endless laughs, good times. He's on his own right now, and he's teaching up at Lewis and Clark for a quarter. Creative writing just came from Austin, where he taught for a quarter. And he's going to step up and read a little essay, aren't you? Yeah. Let's give a hand for Michael McGriff.
Howdy. So Scott, should I not touch this microphone?
No, you can do what you want with it, up, down.
Well, thanks for having me here. My name is Mike McGriff, and I used to be a bookstore employee. I am 1,000% effective at catching shoplifters. So you can ask Scott about that over here. I'm going to start by reading my favorite William Stafford poem, Ask Me. Sometime when the river is ice, ask me mistakes I've made. Ask me whether what I've done is my life. Others have come in their slow way into my thought, and some have tried to help or to hurt. Ask me what difference their strongest love or hate has made. I will listen to what you say. You and I can turn and look at the silent river and wait. We know the current is there hidden, and there are comings and goings from miles away that hold the stillness exactly before us. What the river says, that is what I say. So I know I just stole that from somebody. You wanted to read it today? It's a great poem. Well, I am the founding editor of Tavern Books, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit literary publisher based in Portland. I started it with the poet Carl Adamczyk. In 2009, we've published 30 books of poetry. And we're just Thanks. And we mostly do literary reprints and poetry in translation. And so we have 4 Tomas Tranströmer titles, the great Israeli poet Natan Zak, UNSA Odio, the first Costa Rican poet ever to be translated into English and published in the United States. A small volume by George Hitchcock, 6-minute poems, his last selection from his last poems. Albert Goldbarth, Killarney Clary, Gaddafi, Busan, Adrian C. Lewis, Joseph Millar, Joe McDougall, Nellie Sachs, Charles Simic, Leonardo Sinisgali, and the list goes on and on. Our forthcoming title is Skin by Tone Skranjec, who's a Slovenian poet. But I'm here today to talk about Winterward, this very curious William Stafford book. And I've written a piece for the Friends of William Stafford, which I thought I would read to you all today. And this came out in their newsletter recently. And William Stafford is a baffling figure. And not so much him, but the people who chase him around and go to these birthday events. And so when we were talking about this book, we were talking about the cult of William Stafford. And why is it so? And for a poet who insisted, and to quote him, Stafford, that poems are not monuments, it's very interesting to see a poet turn into a monument. Yeah. So when we were looking to, be involved with the centennial, Paul Merchant brought this project to our attention. Then we had to have a discussion on whether or not this was an interesting book or not, whether it served the legacy of the poet or whether it was just sort of a cult fetish. So I wrote this essay with that in mind. So I'll read it to you. The publication of Winterward, with Tavern Books this year, marks many things. First and foremost, it marks the emergence of a totally new, as well as a completely unique, single-volume collection by one of post-war America's most beloved and critically acclaimed poets. For this reason alone, poetry lovers of all stripes have cause for celebration. But first, a bit of backstory and a few musings. Paul Merchant, former William Stafford archivist at Lewis and Clark College, has been at the forefront of researching, unearthing, contextualizing, preserving, and disseminating the wonders of William Stafford's legacy. The term archivist falls short in describing Paul's vocation at the Stafford Archive. I would like to suggest an overhaul for the definition of the term archivist, for Paul's sake. Let's say archivist is now a combination of 2 words, archive and activist. That's a far better way of framing what Paul's been up to over the years. It should be a little surprise then that it was Paul Merchant who brought Winterward to the attention of Tavern Books nearly 3 years ago. I was visiting the William Stafford Archive while Carl Adamczyk is, together with Carl Adamczyk and Natalie Garriott, that I edit Tavern Books, was one of its writers in residence. Paul had offered to give me a tour and show me some of the archive's gems and oddities, its rarities and B-sides. Being both a bibliophile and a fan of Stafford's work, I was thrilled. At this point, Carl and I had already started Tavern Books in 2009 with the simple and explicit vision to reintroduce lost works of poetry to the reading public. Books that had fallen out of print, books by neglected masters, a book so obscure that the term obscure was somehow a generous moniker. Paul's tour was insightful and exhilarating, but that's not where this detective story begins. Poetry is a curious genre. Writing poetry, spreading the word about a great collection, publishing poetry, discovering a new author, these are all acts and byproducts of community and the grassiest of grassroots efforts. As genres, nonfiction and fiction have a boundless community generated by the marketplace, for good and for ill, whereas poetry depends on free public readings, get-togethers in living rooms, telephone calls between friends, newsletters, and writing groups to keep the sparks floating through the air. Which brings me back to Paul Merchant. We were sitting in the archive when Paul showed us a facsimile copy of Winterward, the creative portion of William Stafford's 1954 PhD dissertation as submitted to the University of Iowa. For a lover of rare and obscure manuscripts, this was a marvelous objet d'art. Even in its facsimile edition, it was completely glorious. It's easy to forget that our literary heroes and ancestors are, what's the right word? Human, real. We have a burning and unhealthy desire to ignore this very fact. We want Ted Hughes to play the role of the mustachioed villain in his dark cape of lust. We want Carl Sandburg cradling a sheep with a bit of fog drifting through the background on its little calf feet. Of course, both of these poets rise far and away from such simplistic and tragically misguided characterizations. Unfortunately, William Stafford, too, can often be spotted as an oversized balloon floating above the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in our collective and worshipful poetry minds. It's essential for us, for poetry, and for the legacy of the poet himself to keep William Stafford framed within the human, earthly, fragile, temporary, infallible. After all, he can write a bad poem. That's exactly what happened when Carl and I saw that bound stack of photocopied dissertation pages. Here was the first evidence of a movement toward a major poet's first collection of poetry. Stafford, the graduate student. William with no published poetry book, Stafford. You and me, anyone who's ever sat down to seriously write a poem. The myth stripped away, another person bent over a formidable blank page, suddenly whisked into the sublime by lyrical poetry and its myriad traditions. Winterward is a stack of 8.5 by 11 photocopied pages shown with a kind of refreshing and brilliant anonymity. And so the detective story begins. What is Winterward exactly? Is it a book? Is it merely a dissertation? Is it both? Is it neither? Is it something altogether different? First off, it's a reminder of just how many essential American literary voices have passed through the halls of the University of Iowa and the Writers' Workshop. The University of Iowa began accepting creative dissertations in partial fulfillment of advanced degrees in the early 1920s, a move that gave birth to the MFA program, as well as to the fostering and funding of creative writing within English departments across the country. By the time Stafford submitted Winterward as a part of his advanced degree, the Writers' Workshop had been in official existence for nearly 20 years, a staggering fact. Winterward is a reminder, and it's also a snapshot of an emerging writer purposefully sculpting a collection of poems, a point that Paul highlights in his 6-page bibliographic note in the Tavern Books edition of Winterward. These are Paul's words. Of the 35 poems in Winterward, 18 were composed during the first 2 years spent at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop between the fall of 1950 and the summer of 1952. 7 were written in Oregon between leaving the workshop and submission of the dissertation in February of 1954. The remaining 10 were already in Stafford's files when he arrived at Iowa. This willingness to exclude successful poems from before and after the workshop suggests that Stafford was deliberately fashioning a coordinated collection, rather than simply assembling a gathering of his best poems to date. The result is a tough, somber book created during years of uncertainty and privation. We're not often given access to a poet's creative laboratory. What's of interest here is what's not included in Winterward. By the time Stafford showed up at the gates of Iowa, he'd already written hundreds of poems, and he'd already gained notoriety through high-profile publications in venues such as the New Yorker, and none of the poems from the New Yorker, it turns out, end up in Winterward. Importantly, Winterward shows us a poet in pursuit of crafting a slim, carefully condensed, cohesive volume of poetry. And what's more striking is that, though crafted as a book, Winterward ultimately dissatisfied William Stafford as a publishable volume. Again, more patience. No lowering of standards. Only 7 poems from Winterward would find their way into Stafford's first full-length collection, West of Your City, in 1960. A reminder, a snapshot, but also a blueprint. In addition to West of Your City, Winterward contains poems that later appeared in several notable collections, including The Rescue Here and Traveling Through the Dark. It's disarming, even shocking, to open Winterward to find such famous poems as Bifocal and The Fish Counter at Bonneville in the table of contents. Perhaps a blueprint is what Winterward most resembles. The plans drawn up by a great and instinctive draftsman. Plans that were eventually scrapped so a new plan could take shape, so a new instinct could be followed like the golden thread. Looking at Winterward through this lens reminds us of the acute patience and care that go into the crafting of both a single poem and a book of poems. All the dead ends and missteps and happy accidents and bad writing it takes just to get one line to take shape on the page. Tavern Books is especially proud of this publication. Importantly and significantly, the publication of Winterward was a community project. We worked closely with Paul Merchant, Jeremy Skinner, who selected the 2 amazing author photos we used, one of which is Stafford's student ID at Iowa, and Doug Erickson at Lewis and Clark Special Collections. The book started in the William Stafford archive as a pile of manuscript pages at Lewis and Clark College and an idea, and has returned there as a trade edition. Paul Merchant and Kim Stafford helped us formulate the architecture of the book itself, cover art, fonts, layout, front and back matter. Winterward took many iterations, with Paul and Kim serving as sounding boards, spin doctors, and veto holders. Paul Merchant, Kim Stafford, and Vince Wixon pored over the book, lending us their editorial time and expertise. We received generous grants from both the Friends of William Stafford and the Oregon Cultural Trust, which, along with donations from numerous individual donors, allowed us to double our print run and issue this book in paperback and hardcover editions, offset printed. It's humbling to be surrounded by so many individuals and institutions in this state that came together to help support such a unique publication. Tavern Books is a national press with its ear to the regional rail, and it's a regional press with a national scope. No matter how one prefers to frame William Stafford and his work, Winterward fits perfectly into Tavern Books' unconventional and forward-thinking catalog and ethos. One of the most striking parts of this collection is how it opens with William Stafford speaking to us from his 1954 preface. The preface, which Stafford wrote and then ultimately removed from his dissertation, heretofore only existed in Lewis and Clark College Special Collections. Simply put, Stafford's prose is astounding. The poet references Wordsworth, Milton, Cocteau, and Pound in an effort to frame the strengths and shortcomings of his own work, as well as the strengths and shortcomings of workshop culture in general. Stafford articulates the precarious position of the writer. He sees himself giving in to contemporary trends in artistic institutionalization, while at the same time reaching toward that repose of mind and religiousness of purpose that one finds when following one's own artistic, aesthetic, and ethical impulses. As a poet, Stafford clearly sees himself wearing the Janus mask. Before us on the page is a writer, thinker, and citizen fully embroiled in a tangle of contradictions. From the get-go, we see a great mind at work. We're delighted with this collection, even if it isn't exactly a book. Poor William Stafford. Have we lowered his standards against his will by publishing this collection? I'm confident that we have not. In fact, I believe the opposite is true. I'm delighted that those new to Stafford's work, longtime admirers, and scholars alike will find something to cherish in these pages. This dissertation was completed nearly 60 years ago, yet it's only through its publication in 2013-14 that we're offered this fresh view into a thrilling body of work from a major writer. Kim Stafford wrote us, quote, "Once you open Winterward, it's like a literary detective story." This sentiment speaks to the mystery and impulse of any poet, of any collection of poems. With the publication of Winterward, we are now given the opportunity to take part in another chapter of such a mystery. So, I would like to talk to you just for 2 seconds about this book and what we do at Tavern Books. We do offset printing, which is analog plates on a Heidelberg press with real ink. And our books are bound into signatures with headbands and foil stamped, and they're quite lovely. So I would like to thank the Friends of William Stafford and the Oregon Cultural Trust, and many individuals, some of whom are in this room, for making some generous donations so we can make such a beautiful book. And we've printed a ton of these, and we're selling like hotcakes, which is great. So thanks so much for inviting me to talk, read my little essay. I'd love to talk to anyone about the press if you want to grab me afterwards. We have lots on our plate. Our big book in the works is George Hitchcock's collected poems, which will be coming out in the fall of 2014. And we'll have a big blowout party for that here, no doubt about it. So, thank you so much.
Well, somebody very tall. Thank you, Mike. That was great to hear that. And I've got a few questions. We can round him up later. he opened by reading Ask Me and said he probably stole that from somebody. Well, I wish to promote the idea that one reading, even among just a few people here, is not enough. Whatever you would like to read, read it, because in your voice, it's going to be different than in anyone else's voice. And with that, let's take a short break and eat some more, and then we'll come back and start the general reading. Okay. Okay. Settle back in. Mike did not read anything from the new publication, so I'm going to jump in and do that to start out with. And after I've read this little piece, Martha will come up and talk about the organization, the Friends of William Stafford, and what's going on, and whatever else she has on her mind. This is called a survey. Down in the frantic mountains, they say a canyon winds, crammed with hysterical water, hushed by placid sands. They tried to map that country, sent out a field boot crew, but the river surged at night and ripped the map in two. So they sent out wildcats, printed with intricate lines of fur, to put their paws with such finesse the ground was unaware. Now, only the wildcats know it, putting a tentative paw, soothing the hackles of the ridges, pouring past rocks and away. The sun rakes that land each morning, the mountains buck and scream. By night, the wild cats pad by, gazing it quiet again. He was pretty good way back then even, wasn't he? Okay, Martha, if you want to come up and say a little bit about the Friends of William Stafford, and I don't know, there's free materials back there, audio and video materials, as well as Scott's fine selection of books, and a few broadsides. The broadsides are $10. I think everything else is marked. So, Martha.
Okay, I would like to start by asking if the person who I think bought the last copy of the broadside called Smoke Signals still has it, and could I borrow it? Because I was going to read it as a demonstration of what the Friends of William Stafford is about. Thank you. This is, and Paul Merchant said this when we were making this broadside. He said, this is not a poem, it's a dedication. However, if you want to use it, I guess we can let you do that. It is the dedication page to A Glass Face in the Rain, which was published in 1982 and is now long gone, and if you ever see a copy in a secondhand bookstore, grab it. It's one of many of Bill's smaller publications, or publications by smaller presses, which have gone out of print and are not coming back, but do still bob to the surface occasionally. A Glass Face is one of my personal favorites of Bill's. I'm supposed to talk about the Friends of William Stafford, which is an organization which came together to keep Bill's poetry alive and in the public eye and ear, and to further his interest in writing, in poetry, and his teaching style, which is a little unorthodox. And we wanted to keep that alive and working in the world. So what we do is promote readings, promote workshops, and it's not just Stafford's poetry we're interested in promoting, it's whatever's going on now in the world of poetry. He said himself that he was always most interested in the next thing. He said, and I heard him say this actually, I would trade everything I've written for the next thing to come along. And he didn't just mean his, he meant everybody's. He wanted to know what everybody was doing, and he wanted to encourage it to go on happening. So that's what the Friends of William Stafford are trying to be about. There are copies of the newsletter with Mike's essay in it back there, and they're free, help yourselves. There is a mission statement in the back, and also a page which invites you to become a friend, and you can do it by mailing in this page, or you can do it online. I have to say that the mission statement, as presented in this newsletter, is pretty awful. It's academic, it's stiff, it's pretentious. We strive to provide ongoing education in poetry and literature in local schools and communities in ways that will encourage and enrich a broad spectrum of readers and writers. In doing so, we hope to contribute to William Stafford's legacy for generations to come. I think we could contribute to it better by climbing off our high horse and rewriting the mission statement. The point of the organization is to further Bill's poetry and his teaching style and his encouragement and enthusiasm for the ongoing process of writing and discovering who you are and where you are by writing. So I will speak to the board about that. What I'm going to do, because I think that this, which is Bill's own words, this are Bill's, never mind. Bill wrote this as the dedication to A Glass Face in the Rain. And I think that it expresses what the Friends of William Stafford are trying to do much better than they've expressed it themselves. It's called Smoke Signals, a Dedication. There are people on a parallel way. We do not see them often, or even think of them often, but it is precious to us that they are sharing the world. Something about how they have accepted their lives, or how the sunlight happens to them, helps us to hold strange, enigmatic days in line for our own living. It is important that these people know this recognition, but it is also important that no purpose or obligation related to this be intruded into their lives. This book intends to be for anyone, but especially for those on that parallel way. Here is a smoke signal, unmistakable, but unobtrusive. We are following what comes, going through the world, knowing each other, building our little fires. And I have a poem of Bill's, which I'm going to have lost the page of, which I would also like to read. It's called A Course in Creative Writing. They want a wilderness with a map. But how about errors that give a new start? Or leaves that are edging into the light? Or the many places a road can't find? Maybe there's a land where you have to sing to explain anything. You blow a little whistle just right, and the next tree you meet is itself. And many a tree is not there yet. Things come toward you when you walk. You go along singing a song that says, where you are going becomes its own because you start. You blow a little whistle, and a world begins under the map. Now, where are we going from here? Are we going to start? Are we starting the open reading, or do you have another thing to say?
I've always got another thing to read, but we can start the open reading.
Okay.
Could
Everybody,
you just say the title of that poem again?
what? I'm
The
sorry.
title of that poem you just read?
Oh, the smoke signal?
Yeah. Is that what it?
That's what it's
Okay.
called.
Okay, thank you.
And it's not a poem, and you're only going to find it because I'm afraid the broadsides are all gone now, by finding a copy or borrowing from a library a copy of A Glass Face in the Rain.
Right.
It's
But-
the
but-
dedication page.
The second one,
The-
what was the title of the second?
Oh, the
Yeah,
second
the
one
poem.
is called A Course in Creative Writing.
Thank you.
And that's in the way it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to read one short Stafford poem, and then everybody start getting in line. We've got lots of time to read and lots of people out there. I know of one sitting right down there who has some things prepared. So step on around and be ready so we don't have lots of time for people to sit and scratch their head, whatever else. Anyway, Spirit of Place, Great Blue Heron. And this, the story I've heard is that Stafford was in New York, I believe with Kim, and they were due at some event. And Kim said, we got to get ready, let's go. And Bill said, just a minute, I promised I would write a poem for Portland. So he went off in a corner somewhere and wrote this poem. Out of their loneliness for each other, two reeds, or maybe two shadows, lurch forward and become suddenly a life, lifted from dawn or the rain. It is the wilderness come back again, a lagoon with our city reflected in its eye. We live by faith in such presences. It is a test for us, that thin but real undulating figure that promises, if you keep faith, I will exist at the edge, where your vision joins the sunlight and the rain, heads in the light, feet that go down in the mud, where the truth is. Next. Oh, that's right, I was going to say something. Pardon me. Okay, you say it for me.
Eric Muller here, and I hope people identify themselves. A Stafford reader, along with my wife, from 1962, the very early books. I asked Martha and Jerry, I said, I've got more than one piece, is that going to be okay? And it is okay. So if you've got 15 pieces, 3 or 4 pieces that you feel you want to deliver, the permission that I got from Jerry, and I think he'll sign off on this, is that you can come up and do it at your first shot, or you can come around again later in the afternoon. I really like William Stafford's children, and the children who are in school and who are being educated, and education may be a trope in a way that is very Staffordian, an ongoing process. What's next? What am I going to learn in an unfolding experience? So I'd like to read a poem from Traveling Through the Dark. It's one of my favorites, At Liberty School. Girl in the front row who had no mother and went home every day to get supper. The class became silent when you left early. Elaborate histories were in our book, but of all the races, you were the good. The taxes of Rome were at your feet. When the bell rang, we did not write anymore. Traitor to everything else, we poured to the fountain. I bent and thought of you. Our town now is Atlantis, crystal, water-bound. At the door of the schoolhouse, fish are swimming round. Thinking in and out of the church tower go deep waves. Girl in the front row who had no mother. As I passed the alleys of our town toward supper, there were not spiteful nails in any board. I want to read a poem of mine, which was stimulated by Stafford's passing, and even before I read his last poem, which is In the Way Things Are, I imagined his last poem as a new kid in school, coming to a schoolyard, unfamiliar with everyone, rather a strange one. And the consciousness at the end is the consciousness of Stafford himself, or some sort of principal. And maybe Stafford was a principal, right? Spell it either way you'd like. So I titled this The Last Poem for William Stafford. The last poem he made had stone in it and wind, held steady, cried friend. Its forehead blazed. It ran outside to join the other kids. The others drew away, looked vague. The swings, abandoned, rocked quiet. From the window he watched the new one grasp and climb the swing. And this is what the principal says. It's hard being new, and this one, with its bright hair, always will be last. And my third offering is from a senior poet, Robert Davies, in Portland. He's in his 80s, just published another book. He self-publishes his books and gives them away free. Good person to bump into. But I'm drawing from a much earlier edition here of Fireweed magazine, 1994. several months after Stafford's death, and this was a memorial volume. And his poem is called Grapes, Robert A. Davies, to William E. Stafford, 1914-1993. And I'm glad I'm reading this as sort of the first offer in the free reading, because I think it opens up the huge range of Stafford's work and some of the ambiguity we may feel about him. Who is this person? Here it goes, Grapes, by Robert A. Davies. In the middle of the night, munching away on the grapes till I poke them out with a broom, all 4 raccoons. Have you thought of just letting them feed? Well, I'm not going to shoot them. Next night, they aren't there, and neither is Bill Stafford, a masked man who tried to hide behind his eyes. Odd to mix raccoons and William E. Stafford, but I'm in the middle of a poem, going where it goes, the way he taught us to do. Outsmarting us all, getting the sweet grapes, leaving the sour. Do I poke, watch, and admire? Biggest poet raccoon munching away the night. His shadow lingers on. Eons on will move us to say what poems will compare. Oh, Bill, you were good, masked, elusive, clever. I pick up this grape you dropped. Is it sweet or is it sour? So many things we don't know. Thank you.
My name is Bonnie Richmond, and this is a poem by William Stafford. It's called Maybe Alone on My Bike. I listen, and the mountain lakes hear snowflakes come on those winter wings. Only the owls are awake to see, their radar gaze and furred ears alert. In that stillness, a meaning shakes. And I have thought, maybe alone on my bike, quaintly on a cold evening pedaling home. Think, the splendor of our life, its current unknown as those mountains, the scene no one sees. Oh, citizens of our great amnesty, we might have died. We live. Marvels coast by, great veers and swoops of air, so bright the lamps waver in tears. And I hear in the chain a chuckle I like to hear.
I'm Chuck Adams. I come late to this interest in William Stafford. I moderate a group that we call Reader's Theater Group, where we go from all the rest homes here in town, presently we have 10, and read for about 45, 50 minutes to senior citizens. And Joyce Salisbury did me the kindness of giving me a couple of volumes, and I started picking things out. And this one particularly appeals to me, a ritual to read to each other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world. And following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade, holding each other's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs and not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no, maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep.
Good evening, and thanks to all the friends of William Stafford. I think it's more nerve-wracking to read one of my own poems than to read one of his, but I'll try and do one of each. There's probably at least a few people here that have never been on the North Cascades Highway. And if you haven't, set your plans to go. It's usually closed in the wintertime. But as most of you know, how many certain amount of the Methow River poems are there on plaques under plastic in beautiful places along the river. And if you go over 5,200 feet on Washington Pass, and there you'll see the poem "A Valley Like This." And I say this because if I hadn't stood at that one place and read that poem and been reading Stafford for 20 plus years, I probably couldn't have written this poem, which I don't have a title for, but I could call it a Cascade Message. The sun rises more shyly today than its usual winter scene. Powerful hues of hello to this day are reflected to me from the Olympic glow. The elder presence of fir, cedar, spruce, and pine bless the ground where I sit. There's rivers that flow for miles through valleys by roads that deer walk on as daylight slides over the dark. Eagles sit by the river, glancing over at cars and trucks. I can't even read my writing. Let's just try that again. Eagles sit by the river, glancing over at cars and trucks, barreling up the highway to Marble Mount, New Halem, and Colville. They listen to the wind and the stony sounds that never stop, constantly blessing our days with simple tunes of grace. Wow, thank you. I just unearthed that poem this morning. And this one is less familiar to me, but probably more familiar to many of you. It's called The Way I Write. In the mornings, I lie partly propped up the way Thomas Jefferson did when he slept at Monticello. Then I stop and look away like Emily Dickinson when she was thinking about the carriage and the fly. When someone disturbs me, I come back like Pascal from those infinite spaces, but I don't have his great reassurances of math following along with me. So somehow the world around me is even scarier. Besides, the world on fire surrounds me, and the wild faces Dante awakened on his descent through the dark, forbidden caverns. But over my roof bends my own kind my own kind sky and the mouse-nibbled sound of now. The sky has waited a long time for this day. Trees have reached out, the river has scrambled to get where it is, and here I bring my little mind to the edge of the ocean and let it think. My head lolls to one side as thoughts pour onto the page, important additions but immediately obsolete, like waves. The ocean and I have many pebbles to find and wash off and roll into shape. What happens to all these rocks? They have become sand, and then my hand stops. Thomas Jefferson, Emily Dickinson, Pascal, Dante, they all pause too. The sky waits. I lean forward and write.
Hi, I've been coming here for a long time. I've been to some of these before, and I've also been a person who buys and sells at Tsunami Books, and have appreciated them through the years for their being here. And my name is Sheila Lowe, and this one is from Ask Me by William Stafford, and I had a farm out between Harrisburg and Coburg, and so things about farms really get to me, and this really got to me because my children are grown and I'm no longer on the farm, and I'm not too long for the end of this world, and so it just spoke to me. It's called The Farm on the Great Plains. A telephone line goes cold. Birds tread it wherever it goes. A farm back of a great plain tugs at the end of the line. I call that farm every year, ringing it, listening still. No one is at home on the farm. The line gives only a hum. Some year I will ring the line on a night at last the right one, and with an eye tapered for braille from the phone on the wall, I will see the tenant who waits, the last one left at the place. Through the dark my braille eye will lovingly touch his face. Hello, is mother at home? No one is at home today. But father, he should be there. No one is here. But you, are you the one? Then the line will be gone because both ends will be home. No space, no birds, no farm. Myself will be the plain, wise as winter is gray, pure as cold posts go, pacing toward what I know. And the other one I want to read is because I'm so crazy about dogs all my life. It's called Choosing a Dog. It's love, they say. You touch the right one and a whole half of the universe wakes up a new half. Some people never find that half, or they neglect it or trade it for money or success, and it dies. The face of big dogs tell over the years that size is a burden. You enjoy it for a while, but then maintenance gets to you. When I get old, I think I'll keep not a little dog, but a serious dog for the casual drop-in criminal. My kind of dog, unimpressed by dress or manner, just knowing what's really there by the smell. Your good dogs, some things that they hear, they don't really want you to know. It's too grim or ethereal. And sometimes when they look in the fire, they see time going on and someone alone, but they don't say anything.
Hello, my name is John Heinz, and as Jerry pointed out earlier, this is a landmark year for William Stafford. He was born in 1914 in Hutchinson, Kansas. In February 1969, my father had a landmark birthday. He turned 50 years old. He was born on Valentine's Day in 1919. He was very perversely proud of this because Valentine's Day in 1859 was also the birthday of the state of Oregon. So he was always very proud that he was a native-born Oregonian. He was born in February 1919 in Portland, Oregon. And I think to give you the proper context for this poem, I should tell you that my parents met Bill and Dorothy Stafford when their daughter Barbara enrolled in my mother's class at Forest Hill School in Lake Oswego. And as a consequence, Bill Stafford eventually became quite well acquainted with my father's perverse pride in his native habitat and his having been born in Oregon and considered himself an SNOB. So when my father turned 50, Bill Stafford sent him a first edition copy of The Rescued Year and marked the poem that he wanted my father to read first. And as I was looking over that poem, I noticed that the dedication that appears in this book, that is by William Stafford, was peculiarly appropriate not only to this occasion, but to also the occasion of my father's birthday. Here's the dedication. This is not a poem, this is Stafford's dedication to the rescued year. Each of us lives in real time, a thin ribbon that unwinds inexorably and stops. But in memory and imagination, we live many lives that fold and braid and elaborate that ribbon of real time. The poems of the rescued year carry memory and imagination back and forth over what experience brings. The poems transmute remembered events, feelings, landscapes, people. The world happens twice. Once what we see it as, second, it legends itself deep the way it is. That's the dedication. The poem that Bill Stafford wanted my father to read as kind of a gloss on his perverse pride is called Out West. It's kind of a postcard to, from, or about Oregon. And this is the poem. This air the mountains watch in Oregon holds every flower or tree embraced. You meet the air at the door and stop. It has brought waterfalls in its breath. Kids call, dogs bark. A chainsaw climbs the latticework behind the trees. We know each day by the space it has and then what fills it. There is a reward here. Maybe the mountains, maybe only the sense that after what is must come something else always. It's a light thing, a bounce, to live here. At Salem, we saw Governor Hatfield wave his hand. His arm was the taffy Oregon pulled, and his voice was drawn by invisible birds as far as geese bob in the reeds near Klamath Falls. The Oregon day crowds in at the door. Its cool air and the smell of rain brought all over as we trembled to smell the fog in its paw, our breath moving to get loose in the woods or over the restless water. And in the mountains, that water is clear, only a reminder of the air it looks at. The trout hang there on their little thin wings, hearing the governor speak into the microphone, spots on their applauding gills. Thank you.
Try. Am I doing okay, Scott? Okay, good. I have two poems, one by William Stafford, and I was introduced to this poem as a broadside, and it resonates with me because one, I love the country in which this poem takes place, and two, I love frogs. This is Now Here Before Dawn, and I'm Tom Titus. An owl sound wandered along the road with me. I didn't hear it. I breathed it into my ears. Little ones at first, the stars retired, leaving polished little circles on the sky for a while. Then the sun began to shout from below the horizon. Throngs of birds campaigned, their music a tent of sound. From across a pond, out of the mist, one drake made a V and said its name. Some vast animal of air began to rouse from the reeds and lean outward. Frogs discovered their national anthem again. I didn't know a ditch could hold so much joy. So magic a time it was that I was both brave and afraid. Someday like this might save the world. Now Here at Dawn. And this is a poem that I wrote on the way home. It took place on the way home one evening last summer. I'd say it's inspired by William Stafford because the title of the poem is Awake Too Early. Bill would disagree with me because he was never awake too early. He was just awake at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I was actually sitting over here scribbling on it as we went, so I think it's in his spirit that I would continue to edit it as I go. Awake too early on new nickel summer, remembering spring, who last evening thrashed out her dying downpour, breathed a final sigh into wild rose sundown. Then Amazon Creek, small river child, ditched into straight, narrow submission for subdivisions, broke free, stretching his 50 green alder willow cottonwood fringe on rising vapor, swirling, becoming one color in my nose, recalling murmuring riffles with slow pools hiding small trout. While a waxing 3/4 moon, round white head of my newborn old soul grandchild, rises, pushing outward against that pure lens of deepening, impossible blue.
I think we should.
Hello.
I think we should take a break and eat some more food, so we don't have to take it all home. And I would like to read a whole bunch of stuff. sometime I wish we could have an ongoing gathering in which everybody just came and brought their favorite Stafford books and sat around in a circle, and somebody would start by reading something, and that would trigger somebody else's, oh, and then they would read something, and it would be a kind of chain reaction. I don't quite know how to make that happen, but I have this fantasy that it would be a wonderful thing. Well, we're doing it now. But there are so many poems, and they have so many interesting connections with each other, that I wish we could do it oftener. Of the things that I thought, ooh, I'm going to read that next, I'm going to choose, before we take a break and work on the food, and then come back and do some more, a poem from The Way It Is called A Course in Creative Writing. No, I already read that, sorry. A poem called After Arguing Against the Contention That Art Must Come from Discontent. And I want to tell a little story about this. The first January after Bill died, there was a reading at Monmouth. Gray Elliott did a Stafford reading in Bill's honor. And I went. I played hooky from my job and rushed over. And Gray read with a signer, a person who spoke Amislan, and spoke it wonderfully. And I wish that she was here so you could see how she spoke after arguing against the contention that art must come from discontent. It was incredibly articulate. The combination of his reading and her signing was wonderful. So you must imagine this done physically as sign language, as you hear the words read. After arguing against the contention that art must come from discontent, whispering to each handhold, I'll be back, I'd go up the cliff in the dark. One place, I'd loosen a rock and listen a long time till it hits faint in the gulf. But the rush of the torrent almost drowns it out, and the wind, I almost forgot the wind. It tears at your side, or it waits and then buffets. You sag outward. I remember they said it would be hard. I scramble by luck into a little pocket out of the wind and begin to beat on the stones with my scratched, numb hands, rocking back and forth in silent laughter there in the dark. Made it again! Oh, how I love this climb. The whispering to stones, the drag, the weight as your muscles crack and ease on, working right. They are back there, discontent, waiting to be driven forth. I pound on the earth, riding the earth past the stars. Made it again. Made it again.
Okay, I don't know what's been going on here. Another break, so that get the circulation back in your legs, and then we'll come back and read some more. I know there are some more readers out there. I've seen them clutching their books, just waiting to be driven up here. one of the advantages of being the sort of coordinator up here is I get the opportunity to insert a poem whenever I feel like it. And this, yeah, this poem I'm about to read, I had sort of let go. It's been anthologized, and I began to feel kind of worn out. The poem worn out. I mean, I'm worn out all the time. But last year we had John Daniels, and in conjunction with a poem of his of a similar nature, he read this, and then later in the Stafford reading season, somebody requested that it be read, and I got the assignment. And I'd like to kind of try to, in my mind at least, revitalize it. This is Traveling Through the Dark. Traveling through the dark, I found a deer, dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By the glow of the tail light, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there, waiting, alive, still, never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead, its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for us all, my only swerving. Then I pushed her over the edge into the river. Okay, time for the hippie. It takes a
The
bit.
new hippie. It's a peach of a.
Hippie on the right.
Hippie on the right. Yeah, a hippie leaning to the right. Put that together. Jerry said I could be next, and then he had to read the one poem that makes me cry every time I hear it, or see it, or read it. I had to pick that one. In my recovery from my brand new present of hip technology, on December 30th, I had 3 things at my house to read. I picked out, the first one was my third approach to, and it worked this time because I wasn't so sleepy, of Evelyn Hess's wonderful book, and going through the 4 seasons with her and the landscape every night I posted out. And then another one I had come across in a book, Winter Count by Barry Lopez, and but this was the last one, and I had started reading Braiding Sweetgrass that Martha Gatchell and Martha and Jerry had given to me as maybe recovery reading for this winter. So a week ago I was sitting out with this book, I think I haven't looked at this forever, and looking at the title story, I said, this is what the author of Braiding Sweetgrass is kind of talking about, and it's what Evelyn's talking about, and hey, I could maybe read this if there's time at the reading. So I'm going to edit a little bit, and it's the title story, so I'm going to start a few pages in, and with everybody at a podium. Podiums are part of the story. and having been involved off and on in academia, or married to academia off and on, which is the same thing, because I typed all those papers and didn't get the degree. Anyway, I know Strunk and White backwards, so here we are. So Barry Lopez, from some editing from Winter Count. For a moment, he was lost. Starlight room, tarpon room, oak room. He was due, he thought suddenly, of aging, of illness. When our children, they had strangulations of the throat, of the cure for any illness as he scanned the long program. In the Creole room. He was due in the Creole room, that's right. Roger Callahan, Nebraska State College. Winter counts from the Dakota, the Crow, and the Blackfeet. Personal histories. Jesus, he thought, why had he come? He had been asked. Oh, yeah, they had asked. Aha, Roger. Oh, I'm on time? I got no, come this way. I want you in front here. Everyone is very excited. Very excited, you know. We're very glad you came. And how is Margaret? Yes, well, Margaret died 2 years ago. He did not hear the man. He sat. The histories began to cover him over like willows, thick as creek willows, and he reached out to steady himself in the pool of time. He listened patiently to the other papers. Edward Rice Phillips, from Purdue, The Okipa Ceremony and Mandan Sexual Habits. The Mandan, he thought, they were all dead. Who would defend them? Renata Morrison, University of Texas, The Role of Women in Northern Plains Religious Ceremonials. He tried to listen, but the words fell away like tumbled leaves. Cottonwoods. Winters so bad they would have to cut down the cottonwood trees for the horses to eat. It was so cold we got water from beaver holes only. And years when they had to eat the horses, we killed our ponies and ate them, no buffalo. Inside this windowless room, he couldn't remember which floor the elevator had opened on, everyone was seated in long rows. From the first row, he could not see anyone. He shifted in his seat, and his leather bag fell with a slap against the linoleum floor. How long had he been carrying papers from one place to another like this? He remembered a friend's poem about a snowy owl dead behind glass in a museum. No more to soar, to hunch and spread his wings and tail and fall silent as moonlight. There was some distant applause, like dry brush rattling in the wind. Years before, defensive theory had concerned him. Not now. I've thrown away everything that is no good, he told a colleague one summer afternoon on his porch, as though shouting over the roar of a storm. I can no longer think of anything worse than proving you're right. He took what was left and went on from there. The speaker. And my purpose in aligning these 4 examples is to clearly demonstrate an irrefutable, what I consider irrefutable relationship. The Arikara never... When he was a boy, his father had taken him one April morning to watch the whooping cranes on the estuaries of the Platte, headed for Alberta. The morning was crucial in the unfolding of his own life. His own winter count would be personal, more personal, as though he were the only one. The other years came around him now, like soft velvet noses of horses touching his arms in the dark. The speaker. While the Cheyenne, contrary to what Greenwald has had to say on this point, but by reinforcing has been stated previously by Gregg and Houston, they were more inclined. He wished for something to hold, something to touch, to strip leaves barehanded from a chokecherry branch or hear rain falling on the surface of a lake. In this windowless room, he ached. Applause. He stood up and walked in quiet shoes to the stage. Once, in the middle of class he was teaching, he had stopped to explain his feeling about walking everywhere in silence. He set his notes on the podium and covered them with his hands. In a clear voice, without apology for his informality or even a look at his papers, he unfolded the winter counts of the Sioux warrior Blue Thunder, of the Blackfeet Badhead, and of the Crow Extends His Paw. He stated that these were personal views of history, sometimes metaphorical, bearing on a larger tribal history. He spoke of the confusion caused by translators who had tried to force agreement among several winter counts, or who mistook the mythic time for some other kind of real time. He concluded by urging less contention. As professional historians, we have too often subordinated one system to another and forgotten altogether the individual view, the poetic view, which is as close to the truth as the consensus, or it can be as distant. He felt that necklace of hawk talons pressing against his clavicles under the weight of his shirt. The applause was respectful, thin, distracted. As he stepped away from the podium, he realized it was perhaps foolish to have accepted this invitation. He could no longer make a final point. He had long ago lost touch with the definitive, the awful distance of reason. He wanted to go back to the podium. You can only tell the story as it was given to you, he wanted to say. Do not lie. Do not make it up. He hesitated for a moment at the edge of the stage. He wished he were back in Nebraska with his students to warn them. It is too dangerous for everyone to have the same story. The same things do not happen to everyone. He felt the edge of self-pity, standing before a plate glass window as wide as the spread of his arms and as tall as his house. He watched the storm that still raged outside, which he could not hear, which he had not been able to hear, bend trees to breaking. It slashed the surface of Lake Pontchartrain and raised air boiling over the gulf beyond. Everything is held together with stories, he thought. That is all that is holding us together. Stories and compassion. And my name is Simon.
My name is Ken Rothman. I used to travel to work. It was often lonely, boring, sometimes harsh, and I brought this book as a companionship, and then I'm not used to reading, so I'm a little bit nervous. So I wrote a poem called Conversation with William Stafford. The subtle edges where a breeze moves, the shadow of a tree, or silences between the calls of a red-winged blackbird, that smell of cool marsh water you speak of or allude to, touch me. You knew and appreciated the transience of your existence, the way you felt the grain of a finely milled board against your hand in a bookshelf you'd make for a grandchild. Our conversation seems more alive to me than what I have in common with all the people eating outside at the Blue Agave in Pleasanton. You are a dead person, more aware of life than the living. What is life in me but the noticing we share? Am I very arrogant to think I share this with you? Someday as we pass further and further into reality, our beings will again transmute into what we always were. We never were that much, and never will be.
Well, I'm back. Couple of things. One is that I spoke with Ingrid last night, and she of course was very concerned about Ralph, and he is doing well, and she has sort of gone, I think it's going to be all right. She was also very sorry to miss this occasion, And when they come home, which may be quite soon or maybe in the middle of February, depending on how Ralph does, there's going to be another occasion. They are both represented in an anthology of poems for William Stafford called A Ritual to Read to Each Other. And we are hoping to have a gathering here at which people, poets in this area who have a poem in that anthology will gather to read. And we will also read poems of people who can't be here, but we want to showcase that collection of poems for Bill. In order to give Ingrid a moment, I'm going to quote from her contribution to Fireweed, the 1994 issue that Eric was talking about. She quoted him to begin. Her essay is titled Things Not to Unlearn, Remembering William Stafford. These words, with others spoken by William Stafford, I lift today from notes taken nearly 20 years ago, in August of 1975, when, with only a few years of teaching under my belt, I found myself working with Bill, together leading a 2-week poetry workshop in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Like so much of Bill's everyday speech, these words seemed instantly right and comforting, except for one problem. What did I, as much a student as anyone there, learn in those 2 weeks I'd ever want to forget? Our classes met 5 mornings a week in a windowless conference room in the basement of a bank. Afternoons, our group linked up with the fiction team, led by novelist John Williams and my husband, Ralph Salisbury. We'd meet again in the bank, or, as we all got more acquainted, out in the woods, or in a nearby meadow. Doing a poem is like letting the words do all the work, like being on the sled behind Eskimo dogs, finding where the eagerness wants to lead. And that was a quote from Bill. And another one, we're always operating on the edge of consciousness, where something is trying to tell us something. And Jackson Hole with the Staffords was where I saw, with indelible clarity, that our daily life and our writing life not only can stay in balance, they need not be separate at all. I'll never forget the class we held one morning in the ski lodge on top of a nearby mountain, a break from our usual routine. Most of us took the chairlift up. It was steep. But who was there ahead of us? Bill and Dorothy, who'd gotten up early and hiked up on foot. Nor will I forget the late afternoon I knocked on the Stafford's door, time for supper, and found Bill poised behind the freestanding TV, which Dorothy was watching, using its top surface as a writing table on which he was finishing that day's poetry assignment. And then she quotes from A Ritual to Read to Each Other. For it is important that awake people be awake, Bill wrote in one of my favorite poems. These words I say to myself at least once a day. They are my prayer, words I try to live by. one of countless writers whose lives Bill's own life touched. I try to keep true to the faith Bill had in me and in us all. To listen to that edge of consciousness where something is trying to tell us something. To remember how much we cannot, must not, unlearn. And then I'm going to read my poem for Bill in the same issue, called The Man in the Gray Shirt Explained, with an epigraph, I never remember which is which, but it's a quote from Bill. The Man in the Gray Shirt explains, where you live, wear the kind of color that your life is. Gray shirt for me. I grew older, like everybody, and quieter, like myself. And there was always something spiriting around inside my skin, looking out windows, wanting to shout boo and watch the town jump. I didn't let it, of course, but we thought it together and laughed in the dark. I was warm and restless, and something gnawed and fretted. I tried talking to people, but they wanted to be listened to instead. So I did that. And something took me for walks and struck up conversations with trees and pebbles, little wavery creeks, the rain. They were good listeners, and I liked the feel of the ground. But in the real world, the one we keep in colored boxes, I felt crowded. I took to bringing little spaces with me in pockets and sharing them around. It made me fit better, and some ears seemed to hear the silences I listened for inside the sounds. Still, I was lonely, like everybody, and always older, that cold current underneath, deepening, darkening, swifter every night, and home so long ago. Yet it seemed near. Something came closer. One morning, I met a bear in the mirror. I opened a book, and my face looked back at me from 100 years away, somewhere in Minnesota. Something welcomed me, and then I understood. I have been home on this ground a long time.
Folks, sorry to interrupt, but if somebody is riding a red bike, it appears to maybe be attached to mine.
I am Joyce Hurlbert Salisbury, and I'm very fond of the Staffords. They were often in our house in the 60s when the boys were just boys. My boys were just boys. And I always tried to see Bill whenever he was in town. I picked out one of Bill's poems that I liked. Watching the jet planes dive. We must go back and find a trail on the road, back to the forest and mountain on the slow land, excuse me. We must begin to circle in the intricate sod by such wild beginnings. Without help, we may find the small trail on through the buffalo bean vines. We must go back with noses and the palms of our hands and climb over the map in far places, everywhere, and lie down whenever there is doubt and sleep there. If roads are unconnected, we must make a path, no matter how far it is or how lowly we arrive. We must find something forgotten by everyone alive and make some fabulous gesture when the sun goes down, as they do by custom in little Mexico towns, where they crawl for some ritual up a rocky steep. The jet planes dive. We must travel on our knees. That's entitled Watching the Jet Planes Dive. And since I have another poem about, I seem to have a tendency to write poems about planes. At the San Francisco airport, fog over the bay, and the interminable bullet shape lifts on shafts of air, or sifts out of mist to concrete. Seagulls drift and dip over a terminal building, and gray has swallowed the trees across the bay. We in fantail fish shape from concrete and metal must rise through this net to all those skies. Thank you.
My name is Kevin McNamara. I'm going to read these first two poems. I'm actually going to read 3 poems. I'm going to read these first 2 for my friend Todd. And I'm remembering that I first saw and heard Bill Stafford at a men's conference that Robert Bly and probably Michael Mead were doing up in Lake Oswego in the late 80s or early 90s. And what I have left with ever since then is just a feeling of his presence. I can still feel his presence. And I know that I went to those conferences somehow inwardly wanting to feel something, and one of the things that I came away with, perhaps the most lasting, is the feeling of his presence. So the first of Todd's poems I'm going to read is Why I'm Happy. Now has come an easy time. I'll let it roll. There's a lake somewhere, so blue and far, nobody owns it. A wind comes by, and a willow listens gracefully. I hear all this every summer. I laugh and cry for every turn of the world. Its terribly cold, innocent spin. That lake stays blue and free. It goes on and on. And I know where it is. And the second poem, and both of these, of course, are from The Way It Is yes. It could happen any time. Tornado, earthquake, Armageddon, it could happen. Or sunshine, love, salvation. It could, you know, That's why we wake and look out. No guarantees in this life. But some bonuses, like morning, like right now, like noon, like evening. And when you mentioned The Glass Face in the Rain, I said to Todd, look at this book. And he said, oh, you got a copy? And I said, yeah, look. Who inscribed it to me in 1994? He gave it to me probably for Christmas. And page 53.
They're going to auction it off, Kevin?
Yeah, Todd said I should auction it off. I thought, you know, there's a risk in that. Somebody might buy it. And then I wouldn't have that. You know, it's like, don't put it on Amazon because who knows where you're going to be. I pulled my my little reader thing out of here. Unfortunately, I put it where it didn't belong when I was horsing around back there. And what I was really intrigued by, oh, it was page 55. And it's in a section called Revelations. And the poem is like his introduction to this little section is called Sending These Messages. Over these writings I bent my head. Now you are considering them. If you turn away, I will look up. A bridge that was there will be gone. For the rest of your life, I will stand here, reaching across. If these writings can bring a turn or an echo that touches you, maybe a face, a slant, a tune, you will stop too and bend over them. When you look up, your thought will reach wherever I am. I know it is strange, and there is no measure for this. The only connection we make is like a twinge, when sometimes they change the beat of music. And we sprawl with it, and hear another world for a minute that is almost there. Thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Sam Rojas Chua, and I wish I had a story to tell you about meeting Bill Stafford, but I won't have that chance. But I do have a new story I would like to share with you, and only 2 people know this story, but now all of you will know this. Eric Muller showed me a book by William Stafford called Traveling in the Dark, and his signature was on the book. And I said, may I touch it? May I touch the book? You know, like a cheerleader in a concert or whatever. But I touched Bill Stafford's signature, and I thought, this is as close as I will get to Bill Stafford. And it's just not the same person after that. I'll read so that's my story, and now I'll read a poem by Bill Stafford. You, reading this, be ready. Starting here, what do you want to remember? How sunlight creeps along a shining floor. What scent of old wood hovers? What softened sound from outside fills the air? Will you ever bring a better gift for the world than the breathing respect that you carry wherever you go right now? Are you waiting for time to show you some better thoughts? When you turn around, starting here, lift this new glimpse that you found. Carry into evening all you want from this day. This interval you spent reading or hearing this, keep it for life. What can anyone give you greater than now? Starting here, right in this room, when you turn around. And this next poem I wrote, and I really tribute this to William Stafford. I wouldn't be able to write this. I wouldn't have been able to write this poem without thinking of Bill Stafford. I wanted to write something that was powerful for me. And I said, what would Bill Stafford tell me? And I thought, he'd probably tell me, you know, write from your heart, not from your mind. Just write what you want to write. This is called Happiness. A dying boy does not count to 10. He does not need to see a playground, a hot iron, a meteor shower. He needs a big white towel underneath his body, a box of Crayola, minus the black and white. He needs to know what bravery is and how many blinks it takes for the eyes to conjure up the ocean. Thank you.
I'm Brian Salisbury, I'm Ralph's son. Can't say I really remember much about Bill Stafford. I'm sure he was in the house when I was a little kid. But anyway, I found a poem of his that's rather similar to one of mine, so I'll read them. His is called Near. Walking along in this not quite prose way, we both know it is not quite prose we speak, and it is time to notice this intolerable snow innumerably touching before we sink. It is time to notice, I say, the freezing snow hesitating toward us from its gray heaven. Listen, it is falling, not quite silently, and under it still, you and I are walking. Maybe there are trumpets in the houses we pass, and a red bird watching them from an evergreen. But nothing will happen until we pause to flame what we know before any signal's given. And then this is me, as it's called entanglement. It's a quantum entanglement, among other things, and relationships and so on. We are all waves, still treated as particles. We flow around categories, sometimes fit in yin and yang at once. Relativity is, everything is, a matter of perspective. If you bring up relationship, you have lost perspective. When one's love transforms to analysis, measurement makes the other's love paralysis. The uncertainty principle is that if you feel uncertain enough to measure us, the act of measuring where we are changes our momentum, what we are. So you don't get what you saw. Procrusty in bed, all is entanglement.
I saw a play of The Wizard of Oz last night, and I feel like the Cowardly Lion. For some reason, I feel scared. But I don't really own another Stafford book. I just bought this one. I own a tape by him that I listen to all the time of his very last reading, and I love it. So anyway, this is in his book that's here, Winterward, and it's called Recall. It's remembering his father, I think. Recall. Image of me, I follow, eyes closed. Now while the sun goes down along the porch rail to the step, and over the walk to the street, studying to the corner, and on to town. Night piles up in the sky, coals of fire sink in the windows out west, and searching from person to person, you limp, not knowing the question to ask. And you wander home late. I hear your step grit on the stone, carefully as I follow, now while the wind pulls the elms by the light down. We can't find the place or the person we needed. Something from home touches parks and shows and even the churches. We can't pick up the hour that sloped into time. Here, where I am, I open my eyes, calling out names lost in the wind. Father, I still go to town. Father, they are all gone, and the blinds are down. So, yeah. And this poem I'm in the middle of writing, but I had to read it because it's his day. And so it's called For Bill Stafford, His Spirit. When I listen to you reading, Bill, it seems like wisdom comes so easy, how it flows from you like the water over stones and the sun shining down. I remember more than anything else the time I took your workshop, and to my delight you liked my poem, or at least I thought you did. And I remember how I loved each time I saw you after that, the friendliness that sparkled in your moon-round sky-blue eyes, and the goodness flowing from your words. There's a story comes from India about a woman not so young, an ascetic, sky-clad, who was praying to Surya, the sun god, by a wide, slow-moving river, and she owned nothing material she could offer as a gift to the one who brought such lovely light. So she held out to him in her cupped hands his own reflection as it shimmered in the water like a handful of precious jewels, and he accepted her gift. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Stephen Blue. I'd like to thank Martha and Jerry and the Friends of William Stafford for this wonderful celebration. I'm your videographer today, and this is the second year that I've videotaped the William Stafford celebration here. So it will be, like last year's, it'll be up on YouTube for your viewing pleasure. And I'd like to read one poem from William Stafford and one of my own, in his spirit. The William Stafford poem I'd like to read is a short one, but it continually inspires me. And the reason it inspires me is because when I read this poem, it gives me permission to walk the road that I walk. And it's called Freedom of Expression. My feet wait there listening, and when they dislike what happens, they begin to press on the floor. They know when it is time to walk out on a program. Pretty soon, they are moving, and as the program fades, you can hear the sound of my feet on gravel. If you have feet with standards, you too may be reminded. You need not accept what's given. You gamblers, pimps, braggarts, oppressive people, not here, my feet are saying. No thanks, let me out of this, and I'm gone. So in that spirit of walking my own road, this is a poem from my chapbook, Wildweed, and it's titled Depth Perception. I'm searching for an answer to the fading crack of dawn, the warmth of daylight waning while the night goes on and on. Do people just get stranger, or is something really wrong with my depth perception? Interject me with some feeling, signify it with some proof. You can understand the magic that inspired me in my youth, and is so hard to come by now. Seems no one has the time to strike the message truly, fit the rhythm to the rhyme. The image is nearly frozen, the cast is almost bronze. The coolness of the chosen ones, whose hipness goes on and on, in never-ending sitcoms, on the ever-prevailing tube, until it infiltrates your psyche like a perpetual engine lube. Yeah, I'm still glad you are here, but you're a dim light in a dark room. It's hard to feel you when you are near, in all this gathering gloom. Could it be you signify the truth that has been lost? Could it be we're poorer, all the coins that have been tossed? I'm searching for an answer to the fading crack of dawn, the warmth of daylight waning, while the night goes on and on. Do people just get stranger, or is something really wrong with my depth perception?
Okay, no feet on gravel yet. I just really, thanks to Martha and Jerry and Scott and everyone, and I just love, this is so wonderful, all of us linking arms and walking together at these programs. It's great. I think of the children's paper chain, and they've got all these construction paper colors, and they're linking them. And so we're doing this for Bill. So happy 100th birthday, Bill Stafford. And I also was just thinking of how many people many of you have said how you knew him or what kind of teacher Bill was. And this is a book that I inherited from my friend Hannah Wilson's library, poems by Linda Pastan, A Fraction of Darkness. And in this collection is At My Desk to Bill Stafford. How many times have I sat this way with the poem's intractable silence between me and the world, with the tree outside the window refusing translation? My leaves are more than syllables, it seems to say. I think of you miles west, floating on the tide of language, so easily, giving only a scissors kick now and then, coming to shore some unexpected but hospitable place. Still we share between us a certain stubbornness, rising each morning to the blank page, climbing the ladder of light at the window all day, listening, both of us, as hard as we can. I really love that. And then I will end, and I don't know if Martha and Jerry have some more, but I found in this wonderful anthology, In Pieces, there's a whole selection of aphorisms by Stafford, and it comes right after, not too long after, the monochromes by Rizos. So it's just wonderful lines. So let me just read a few of them. And I won't, they come from all years from 1951 forward, so I'll just read the lines. When he saw the leopard jump, he knew he was poor. So light the bird, so heavy the mountain. Off a high place, it is courtesy to let others go first. It is legitimate to crawl after the wings are broken. The cost of epics may ruin all this world. The world is an old place. Everything has already happened once. Successful people are in a rut. If there is a trail, you have taken a wrong turn. Daylight is fiction. Dark is where fact lives. You hope, but you know. My kind of faith is that most mountains won't move. It is not the sound of the axe that cuts the tree. Selling your poems is a little like selling your prayers. The ideal teacher, someone who can't talk. Just a couple more. Water is always ready to learn. No matter how well or loud you speak, none of the stars will stop to listen. Now it is ours. By our breath it lives. The forest grows out of its own brown leaves.
Hi, my name is Anil Uman. I'm an educator in Eugene. I've lived in Eugene for about 16 years, and 2014 marks my 40th year in the U.S. as an immigrant. And as an immigrant, I'm personally searching for home. And William Stafford is someone that I discovered in that search, and in that search to find out what it means to become an Oregonian. And when I first came to the U.S., I grew up in the Midwest, and so I was attracted to his work and found out that he also came from the Midwest. I kind of see, we've heard of, carbon footprints and digital footprints and things like that. And what I see William Stafford as someone who's left me literary footprints. And I use his literary footprints as a guide for my moral compass. And also as an immigrant, there's a lot of departings that happen in our lives. And so the poem I'm going to read by William Stafford is Watching Sandhill Cranes. Spirits among us have departed, friends, relatives, neighbors. We can't find them. If we search and call, the sky merely waits. Then someday here come the cranes, planing in from cloud or mist, sharp, lonely spears, awkwardly graceful. They reach for the land, they stalk the plowed fields, not letting us near, not quite our own, not quite the world's. People go by and pull over to watch. They peer and point and wonder. It is because these travelers, these far wanderers, plane down and yearn in a reaching flight. They extend our life, piercing through space to reappear quietly, undeniably, where we are.
So I'm actually terrified of speaking around people, so but a little wine has made me brave. So. And I'm in the enviable position of having each one of these delicious poems be brand new to me, because I actually, until last week, I'd never heard of William Stafford, or him with a capital H, as I've learned tonight, or Bill, as you affectionately call him. Yeah, I'm from Virginia, and I visit my brother every year here in Oregon, and I always come to Tsunami Books. It's a wonderful bookstore, and I just spend hours here wandering around looking at books. And I was told that William Stafford is sort of like the followers of William Stafford, a little bit like the followers of the Grateful Dead. So I said, I really have to go to this poetry reading. So I was just sort of, I can't wait to dig in, just sort of browsing through these poems, and I came across one that I thought might be near to your heart, very short, and Oregon is not my home state, but I think it is for a lot of you, even if you weren't born here. It's called Home State. You can see mountains propped there, a little bit blue. Rivers yearn through those canyons, and storms punctuate even the summer days. Sometimes whole sides of the world lean against where you live. Just being there is a career, and the danger is in forgetting that sometime you might go away. So, a newbie.
My Stafford story is not one of meeting him. I went to a writers' conference in Portland a number of years ago, and probably 25 years ago. And I had the opportunity of taking a class from him, or one of two others that I also wanted to do very much, and unfortunately, I chose one of the others. How dumb is that? Afterwards, I went to the room where he was presenting, and I told him that I had foolishly taken another class, and I really wanted to take his, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, that was the only presentation I was doing." And I said, "Well, I guess I just have to write then." And he said, "Yes, write." So it's kind of a story of empathy from him. But I'll tell you, my backside has been black and blue over the years from kicking myself so much. I would like to read this one that is, I hope, reminiscent of his writing. I called it Home.
Salmon, sleek and silver, sound the greenest depths, slips in and out among mossy rocks. Osprey skims foaming riffles, alone together, exploring their home shores. Great blue heron on one leg at river's edge, reflected in the blue-white surface. Each speaks to the other in a language all their own, telling tales on brave native brothers, scoffing hapless moderns intent on stirring the waters with motors spewing noxious fumes, with flailing oars cutting into rapids. Suddenly, except for the river's murmurs, all is silent. Raven caws, make way, interlopers. Let osprey, heron, salmon have their river. It is their own.
My name is Ed Brindle, and I'm a recent person to Eugene. And I didn't know Bill Stafford in person, but I know Oregon, and I know the earth, and I really appreciate Bill for what he wrote. And somebody talked about a prayer and a footprint, which is kind of interesting because that's what the two poems I'm going to read. One by Bill called Coyote. My left hind. Oh, the other thing about this poem, he wrote it so that when you read it, it looks like a print. You know, I forget, is there a professor of poetry? He probably can tell me what that format is. Because I've forgotten. Well, anyway. My left hind foot steps in the right track of my right forefoot, and my hind right foot steps in the track of my fore left foot, and so on for miles. Me paying no attention while my nose rides along, letting the full report, the whole blast of the countryside come along toward me on rollers of scent. And I come home with a chicken or a rabbit and sit up, singing all night with my friends. It's Baroque, my life, and I tell it on the mountain. I wouldn't trade it for yours. Bill does have a great sense of humor. And I wrote one that's called Blue Prayer. This May morning rises up a blue prayer, answered by the earth itself. Every Oregon tree, a carpenter's dream come true. Every flower a child shall gather, red, pink, blue, yellow, without so much as a paper cut on her smooth hand. Birds winging their way, singing their day into full life. Do not let this morning pass, dear April sleepers. There are too many verbs to explore. See, all your forebears have paved the way with their good intentions, only to wake up blue on the far side of yesterday's May, a day they once thought would never come to pass. Thank you.
The previous two speakers and also Sam make me realize anew how lucky I was to be a student of William Stafford and to sit through innumerable literature classes. He also taught creative writing, but at Lewis and Clark College, where he taught from 1948 until his retirement some 3 decades and change later, he was teaching primarily undergraduate literature classes. And his teaching technique was absolutely unorthodox, unconventional, and inimitable. Most of it consisted of eliciting from his students such thoughts as they had because, as was pointed out previously, he was the best listener. And he was the most empathetic and sympathetic reader as well. And to illustrate that, I think it's probably better, I've already said it much worse than he already said it much better in a very short poem, which is entitled, "At This Point on the Page." Frightened at the slant of the writing, I looked up at the student who shared it with me. Such pain was in the crossing of each T, and a heart that skipped, lurched in the loop of the Y. Sorrowing for the huddled lines my eyes had seen, the terror of the O's and A's, and those draggled G's, I looked up at her face, not wanting to read farther, at least by prose. The hand shook that wrote that far on this page, and what weight formed each word, God knows. And in the spirit of the first speaker of the evening, Mr. McGriff, I would like to make one promotional announcement. The people here, I know, are hardcore Stafford fanatics. So I will tell you that at the institution where he taught, from 1948 until his retirement, there is a quasi-academic conference. I don't think Martha has mentioned it yet, but she may have had it on her agenda. It takes place on the 7th and 8th of February, begins at 3 in the afternoon at Lewis and Clark College. In the evening, there is a ticketed by admission only event at the Newmark Theater in downtown Portland. And on the following day, Saturday, there is an all-day conference, and there will be many poets there, including Prima St. John, Ted Kuzer, and of course, Bill Stafford's son, Kim, a great poet in his own right. So those are all free events, so if you can tear yourself away from the beer festival, I heartily recommend it. Thank you.
Just want to see how much easier it would be to get up here one more time. This is one of the last poems, I guess, that William wrote May 17th, 1993. And I really appreciate things that everyone said. Ken and I think we spoke last year, we were at that same conference with Robert Bly, Michael Mead, and William came in and read some poems one afternoon. And this has a feeling of place, you know. And the Northwest is so beautiful for that. So this, I imagine this was written in the Meta, but it could have been written anywhere. It's called Emily, This Place, and You. She got out of the car here one day, and it was snowing a little. She could see a little glimpse of those mountains, and away down there by the river, the curtain of snow would shift, and those deep, secret places looked all the more mysterious. It was quiet, you know. Her life seemed quiet, too. There had been troubles, sure. Everyone has some. But now, looking out there, she felt easy, at home in the world. Maybe like a casual snowflake. And some people loved her. She would remember that, and remember this place. as you will whenever you go after this day, just to stop by the road and a glimpse of someone's life, and your own too, how you could look out any time, just being a part of things, getting used to being a person, taking it easy, you know.
Anybody else?
So nice to be here with all of you again. My name is Tegra Fisk. I've been here for a few years running. I always feel like I'm the youngest in the room, which is, I always feel like I want to look out there at at the younger generation and say, hey, there's this person out there. You ever heard of him? So everyone else picked the poems that I was going to read, so I'm going to read these as if I'd never read them, which is almost true. So I just picked them out. The first one is Reminders. Before dawn, across the whole road, as I pass, I feel spider webs. Within people's voices, under their words, or woven into the pauses, I hear a hidden sound. One thin green light flashes over a smooth sea just as the sun goes down. What roses lie on the altar of evening, I inhale carefully to keep more of. Tasting all these and letting them have their ways to waken me, I shiver and resolve in my life I will more than live. I read a nice quote today in the library of an interview. William Stafford was asked by the interviewer, when did you start writing poetry? And his response was, when did everyone else stop? I think he saw poetry everywhere. Heard poetry everywhere. The second is something I love so much about him is that he was not afraid of mistakes. And the lessons that lie there for us to continue. This is called practice. When you stop off at rehearsal, you can stumble and still be forgiven. Your shadow practices. A light says, good, good, where the piano meditates with its wide grin, maintaining order as usual, but already trembling for time to go again. Outside the hall, a monstrous organ night moans with its river of wind. It stumbles. Lights flicker and your shadow joins everything that ever failed in the world or triumphed unalone and unknown. Wrapped in that secret mansion where genius lives. Maybe it is all rehearsal, even when practice ends and performance pretends to happen in the light that remembers more than it touches. Back through all the rows and balcony tears. Maybe your stumbling saves you, and that sound in the night is more than the wind.
You have all read the things I wanted to read but felt I probably shouldn't. Thank you, particularly thank you for the last poem. I think that I was there at the workshop at Cannon Beach which inspired that poem. Because we talked in the workshop that I was involved with Bill about failure and how maybe it wasn't a mistake and maybe it wasn't a condemnation, maybe it was a way you found a new way forward. This poem is called No Praise, No Blame. What have the clouds been up to today? You can't blame them, you know. Their edges just happen, and where they go is the fault of the wind. I'd like my arrival to be like that, alone and quiet, really present, but never to blame. And I'd never presume or apologize, and if anyone pressed me, I'd be gone, and come back there only some harmless, irresistible presence, all around you, like the truth, something you need, like the air. And because we tend to read, I think, because we tend to like and to cling to and to rely on the more positive poems, and I think we need to pay attention sometimes to the others. Bill is not the good gray poet who always has wonderful, inspiring aphorisms. He has a very dark side. This is one that which recurs in my head. It's called, It's Heavy to Drag This Big Sack. It's heavy to drag this big sack of what you should have done, and finally, you can't lift it anymore. Someone says, come on, and you just look at them. Trees are waiting, mountains. You never intended that it should come to this, but now has arrived and is looking straight at you, the way a lion does when thinking it over. And anything can happen. It's time for the cavalry, or maybe the Lone Ranger, but they won't come. Maybe the music will spill over and start all again. Maybe. And thank you for reading Coyote, which is another of my favorites. That's one of my favorites because it is Bill in his most positive and integrated moment. There, oops, I think I lost the other one. Okay. No. As an end, because I think we need to think about the darker side too. When Bill died, I was working at the State Forest Nursery in Elton, right on the Umpqua River. And Ingrid, in fact, called me to tell me what had happened. And I took a book of Bill's poems with me to work. And when it got to be break time, instead of going back to the break room, I went down to the river and opened the book. And this is what I opened to. Friends, farewell. After the chores are done, I tune and strum. Nobody hears, nobody cares, and the stars go on. Now that I've told you this, maybe I've been all wrong. So faint a life, and so little done. but I want you all to be easy after I'm gone. Nobody here, nobody care, and the stars go on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. Be careful when you get up. You've been sitting a long time. We don't want any accidents. And I see someone has left a pen up here. So if it's yours, it's still here. And a special thanks to Scott for hanging in with us all this time. Good night. If you had a poem you wanted to read, too late now. But there'll be other opportunities, so brace up. Good night.
Whoop.